right. Good morning, good afternoon to all. Just about everyone on here already knows me, but for those that don't, I'm Andrew Tankel, the Director of Projects with MRP. I know everyone has already actively participated in the Henrietta WEAP training. This training is going to be consolidated for Malaga and Hanford. I know we were scheduled to provide this training more towards the end of the month, but there is discussion of a early on mobilization potentially if we're able to get permits provided in time at Hanford. So we wanted to pull this training up. I know there's quite a few people that are missing this training as well, especially for the subs and for the Henkel's team as well. So with that being said, this training will be recorded. And later on today, I will get a link sent out for all to access. Once the training is complete, we will kindly ask that you send your name, company that you work for, phone number, and email to Priya. Her information will be in the email I will send out later on as well, just so we have a record of completion. And this training, again, is going to be very similar setup to how Henrietta was facilitated. It's going to cover all ground disturbance activities, the support that Rincon is going to be providing, and Rincon will have representation on site as well, similar to Henrietta, which I know you guys are accustomed to already. So without further ado, if you want to take over, Kevin, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. My name is Kevin Hofstad. I serve as the project manager for compliance on construction for the some of the best projects. Work with my team also. We have Matt Gonzalez is going to be presenting, Jennifer Gicenzo and Ryan Wardle, respectively, for paleo, archaeological, and biological resources. So I'm going to start the WEAP now. I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to ask if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it all full? Just the presentation, the PowerPoint? Is that all you see?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, here we go. Worker Environmental Awareness Program, tap and switch for Malaga and Hanford. Worker Environmental Awareness Program, aka WEAP for short, outlines procedures and requirements for the protection of environmental resources, cultural, paleontological, and biological resources on the project sites. This is designed to provide construction personnel with information with potential to encounter these resources, how to identify the resources, and what to do if you do identify the resource on site, and follow up. This project is requirement for implementation and construction for everyone. So anybody coming onto site does have to take this WEAP training. That's also in tandem with the safety training that's also required, which is given separately. This program will outline the legal obligations to protect environmental resources and penalties for not following protocols outlined within this WEAP. What are the goals of the WEAP? It's to be individually responsible in recognizing cultural, paleo, and biological resources, as well as company responsible. We're also going to tell you what to do in order to avoid impacting these resources, best practices to take, how to recognize and be aware of potential resources or conditions that might be present on site that you might not see but could be present. So you'll have your guard up in certain situations, if you will. And finally, to leave the evaluation of importance of environmental resources to the specialists. So we're here to support you. If you see something you're not sure about it, we come in, we analyze it. Sometimes we'll be on site, sometimes we may not be on site. So there's different protocols to follow in those different situations. This is just an outline of the Malaga BEST project. Tap and switch is represented in the red circle there. And that's a closer viewpoint of the Malaga tap and switch work. Hanford BEST here, tap and switch isolated here in this red circle. This is the purple is the battery storage facilities. And then this is a more closer drawing of the work for the Hanford BEST tap and switch work. Just a broad overview of what they are. Malaga BEST tap and switch will be doing some installation of 3 monopoles and some minor electrical work. Hanford BEST tap and switch is going to be pre-outage foundation work, monopoles, occurring mainly in previously disturbed and developed portions of the HEP. So Where we're constructing is actually very dependent on the likelihood of finding resources. If you're in previously disturbed areas, the likelihood of resources are less, but not zero. So we're going to be discussing some of those things today. And with that, I'm going to introduce Matt Gonzalez, our cultural resources specialist, who's going to run through this training, identify certain things relating to cultural resources, how to find them, what to do if you do find them, and how to avoid them. So Matt, take it away, please.
All right, thanks, Kev. Yeah, I'm Matt Gonzalez. I'm a senior archaeologist and project manager here at Rincon, and I've given a ton of these WEAP trainings, and I'm sure if you guys have been doing this work for a while, you've probably done a bunch of these as well. So a lot of it will be repeat, but it's good to go over it because each project has slight variations. So going over the definitions of cultural resources, cultural resources are the remains, human remains or human past remnants of whether it's habitation or occupation. So prehistorically, it's usually Native American artifacts. Historically, it's anything that's 45 to 50 years old. Prehistoric artifacts, most people have seen arrowheads and those types of artifacts. Historically, it would be like bottles and other items that we still most of the time use today. So those are easily recognizable. Let's see. The importance of these resources is for information so that we can gather information from our past and previous uses. Some of the items, as I mentioned, like arrowheads and glass bottles, those are easily recognizable, but there's other stuff that are smaller, like smaller bones, or it could have been food items that were used and consumed prehistorically. So anything that's unusual that you guys might see that doesn't look like it belongs there, there's a chance that it could be a cultural resource. Go ahead, next slide. So again, here's a photo of some arrowheads that people I'm sure recognize. The potential for these projects, I understand that they're previously disturbed, but just because it's been previously disturbed doesn't mean that there's no chance of finding anything. It just means there's less chance. In the upper levels that have been disturbed, it's going to be less likely. And if your excavations or ground disturbing activities do extend beyond the upper few feet, there is more chance to find intact resources in those areas. All right, go next slide. There's numerous state and federal laws that protect cultural resources, and each of the laws has penalties. They have penalties for both financial as well as potential jail time if you're collecting, purposely disturbing or destroying cultural resources. So if you find something, just avoid it and contact the specialist so we can make sure that we can get it out of the way or mitigate it, and you guys can keep moving. Next slide. Again, some more penalties. And for human remains, that's a big one. If there's any bones that have any potential to be human remains, do not disturb them, don't touch them. Contact if there's an archaeologist on site, contact the archaeologist, and you also need to contact the coroner, and the coroner has a process where they'll go and determine whether the bones are from a recent like a crime scene or something like that, or if they're Native American in origin, and depending on what they find will depend on how the processes are after that. All right, next. Here's some examples of some groundstone, which is can be found. These were used for grinding and pounding food to make like meal or like cornmeal and stuff like that. So on the left, you have some monos and hammerstones, and on the right, you have pestles. Next slide. And here's some examples of lithic tools. We all know the projectile points or the arrowheads. And on the right, there's some cores and scrapers. Basically, these are stone tools that they use where they flaked off some of it to make sharp edges to where they can make a cutting or implement or a tool to use for hunting. Next slide. Middens and hearts, these tend to have more deposition, so there's a chance that they can be deeper and have even more information. So you can see in the photo here, the shell midden that's here, the shell isn't just on the surface. You can see this was eroded out. So there is like a cut here where the shell continues to deeper depth. That means it was a longer time of occupation in this area. The same thing with the hearts, that would tend to use the same areas for their hearts. So there will be a deeper deposition of ash and darker soils in those areas. Next slide. Tribal cultural resources. This was something that was recently added to the California Environmental Quality Act. It was added in 2014, 2015 to protect Native American artifacts as well as other resources that they find to be important to them. And the reason why is because a lot of times in the past, it was just kind of mowed over or people just ignored it and destroyed their sites. And so these can be anything from their tools that we've already seen to locations, places, mountains, trees, footpaths that were important to them. And a good example that I always use is their trade routes would have been heavily used areas. So it would have been well-worn paths that wouldn't have vegetation. And as the Europeans came in, they used those footpaths because they were already cleared as wagon trails and then eventually roads, highways, and freeways. But when the tribes used them before, if somebody passed away during those trips, they would be buried right there in those, right on the side of those trade routes. And so they were important to those people. And so that's why they added tribal cultural resources so that we can now protect more of what was sacred to the Native American cultures. All right, next slide. Historic resources. If you guys have worked in the desert, you've seen piles of these cans all over the place and bottles and broken glass. But these are examples of some stuff that you can find from the historic period. Cultural resources. If you see something like this, let us know. We'll try to identify the diagnostic artifacts that are in there to gather as much information as we can from them. Next slide. Prehistoric artifacts on the surface, they can be difficult to identify, especially the stone tools, because it requires kind of a trained eye to identify the subtle differences of a regular rock as opposed to an artifact. But in the top photo, you can kind of see the pebbles and the gravel on the sides. It looks like more natural, but the stones that are in the middle, they kind of pop. They stand out more. You can see some more jagged edges. A lot of times there's color and shape differences that'll make them stand out from the surroundings. So if you see something like that, that looks like it doesn't belong there or it's been modified, let us know and we can evaluate to determine whether it's an artifact or not. The bottom slide is showing how difficult it can be, like with pottery, especially when it's kind of covered in mud. You can kind of see the mud in the bottom where it's kind of cracked. And then the pot shards that are around there, they can blend in pretty well. But you see slight differences where it makes it look, just stand out to your eye. It'll catch your eye. And if you see something like that, let us know. All right, next. The same thing with the historic artifacts. These tend to be a little easier to identify. As I mentioned, they're similar to items that we use today. You see some cans and bottles on the surface, you're going to recognize them. Obviously, you know the difference between a modern soda can and a older soda can. You'll see it looks slightly different. But if you see something like that, let us know. In the bottom slide, you can kind of see a rusted kind of darker section in the bottom left of the photo. If you see something like that on the surface, it could be like a refuse dump or even like a incinerator area where historically they would bury their trash and burn it, and then they would just kind of keep throwing it in that hole until it was full, then they'd cover it and move to the next one. So if you see something like that on the surface, there's a good chance there's going to be some subsurface historic cultural resources below that. All right, next slide. Here again, it's showing some of the deposition, some of the stuff that kind of pops up with the soil changes. So you can see in the top slide, if you're excavating there, it just looks like normal soil. And all of a sudden you hear this, you hit this soil change and the color and the consistency and also what is in there. The same thing at the bottom. You'll see it's a darker kind of color. You'll see that little layer there going through the middle where there's shell and likely other artifacts in that area. So if you come across this while you're excavating, notify an archaeologist immediately. For these projects, since I'm not sure if there's going to be a monitor on site full time, I don't believe there will be for those sections. But if you see something like this, notify Kevin, and Kevin will notify us so we can determine what it is and what needs to be done from there. Next slide. Here's the same example for the historic stuff. You can kind of see it's similar soil changes. As you're excavating, you see it get darker. You can kind of see the artifacts sticking out. So it'll be similar both prehistorically and historically as they appear coming out. It'll just be the artifacts that are within it that'll be different. Next slide. Procedures. So the normal procedures, if something is found while you guys are doing ground disturbing activities, you'll stop work within 100 feet of the find. Work can continue beyond, like outside that 100-foot buffer, until we can get somebody on site, a cultural resource specialist, to determine what the find is. Depending on what it is will depend on whether we just need to kind of come in, snap some photos and take it out, or if additional work will need to be conducted in that area to determine the significance of the find. So if you find something, have that buffer and then notify us immediately so we can get in and out as quickly as possible. Slide. For these projects, they have their own specific protocols for it. So for both of them, it's a 50-foot buffer that'll be in there. So you guys can, ideally we would like 100, but 50 foot is the minimum to kind of leave that buffer so that we can come in and evaluate, notify your supervisor immediately. They'll notify Kevin. Kevin will notify the appropriate person to come out and check. If we have photographs of it, sometimes we can just identify it there within the photograph and say, okay, yeah, that's something that we need to look at further, or something that we're not too worried about. Bones and human remains, those again are very important. We need to make sure that you stop work immediately in that area. Do not touch the bones. Do not disturb them in any way. And again, notify your supervisor. If there's potential for it to be human, the coroner will have to be notified, as I mentioned earlier, and then so they can determine what the next steps are. Next slide. Construction activities. So yeah, so as I mentioned, any ground disturbing activities that you guys do, it could be anything from grading, excavating, drilling, using a shovel to dig in a certain area, anything that's disturbing the ground. In that way, it can be considered a ground disturbing activity. Next slide. All right, that's it for me.
Thanks, Matt. We're going to go into paleontological resources, which are somewhat related, but not the same as the archaeological and cultural resources. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Jennifer Giacenzo, our paleo resource specialist, for some information regarding those resources.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Kevin. Moving right into paleo resources, a lot of similar stuff as far as the type of mitigation that we're doing. Because this is also something that might be impacted during ground disturbing activities. But paleo resources are essentially fossils that will end up getting impacted by digging, drilling, grubbing, grading, and such. They are much older than cultural resources at 5,000 years old. And there are a lot of different things that make a fossil important. Not every fossil is important, though, or scientifically significant. And so that's what we do, is we determine if a fossil needs to be mitigated or not. Next slide. So fossils are not found on the surface of projects typically. They're found deeper in the geologic sediments beneath the soil. And the projects that we're on have low sensitivity, so it's very unlikely that we're going to encounter fossils at either of these projects. But of course, if anything comes up, we're here to help keep the project in compliance. Next slide. So here are some examples of the types of fossils that might be found on this project, and the center slide shows you what it'll probably look like during the time of excavation. These other two slides, or these other two photos, show what it looks like after they're cleaned up and back in our lab and ready to be curated for these types of projects. Next slide. Here are some more photos of fossils that might be encountered on this site. These are ice age sediments at depth out here. And so these are some animals that existed during the ice age. And you've got turtle over here and bison on the left. You might find skull pieces, you might find teeth. So sometimes those are more easily recognizable, but other times they just look a lot like dirt, like you can see here. Next slide. So for these two projects, both Hanford and Malaga, they need to comply with the same conditions that were set in place for the Henrietta Peaker plant, as stated by the CEC. Next slide. So if any fossils are found, we've got a similar protocol to the archaeologists. Stop work in that immediate area. Notify a paleontological monitor, which most likely won't be on this site. So just let your supervisor know, and your supervisor will get a hold of us. We'll try to see if we can clear it through photos. If we're not able to clear it through photos, then we might send someone out to the project to do a spot check and see if it's something that needs to be collected or not. Next slide. So again, this is just one final reminder. Stop the construction that you're doing in that place if you see a fossil, and give us a call. Do not pick up the fossil, leave it in place in case it's just one part of a larger set of fossils underneath the surface, and let us know and we'll take care of it as soon as possible. And next. And this is just another slide showing what type of ground disturbing activities might require calling us and thinking about the paleo for this project. Next.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. One thing to keep in mind, we think probably the biggest risk for the tap and switch work is going to be placement of the poles and drilling at depth. A lot of this work is in already disturbed. However, when you start getting deep down into the dirt, there's much less, if any, disturbance down there. So that's probably where we're going to hit previously undisturbed soils, rock, dirt, etc. And those deep drillings are probably going to be the biggest risk of finding artifacts or resources related to paleo and or archaeological sites, so or resources. So with that, something that we will definitely be involved with is biological resources. They live all around us. They'll be on the site. They'll be flying over the site, tunneling under the site, and generally moving around either adjacent to or within the site. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Ryan Wardle, our biological expert, to discuss some of the biological resources, what they look like, how to avoid them, and protocols if we do encounter them. So take it away, Ryan.
Thanks, Kevin. Hey guys, similar to the paleontological and archaeological resources, there's a lot of different laws, that are applicable to protection of biological resources. Those can be, local, state, federal, even international in the case of like Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and similarly, there can be, penalties to the project as well as individual. for take, so harassment, harming, killing, etc. It doesn't have to be just like running something over. If it's causing a nest to fail, causing a den to be abandoned, something like that, it can still be in violation of some of these laws. So we're going to be working with you guys as much as possible to make sure everything stays in compliance and nobody gets any kind of legal penalties from any of this. So yeah, we can move on. So for Malaga, a little bit less, involvement than some of the other sites. Just raptors, so hawks, falcons, that sort of thing. Other nesting bird species, as well as potential for burrowing owl, and we can go into each of these a little more in a minute. Yeah, Hanford, San Joaquin kit fox, burrowing owl, raptors, and nesting birds. Raptors, nesting birds, pretty much present potentially anywhere. And then yeah, so yeah, nesting birds, as I said, pretty much potential for anywhere. This time of year, not so much. We've had weird weather this year, and I have seen birds nesting late and doing strange things just with the changing weather and temperatures we've been having. So it's always potential, but for the most part, spring, summer, real likelihood. Nesting bird season's considered February 1st to September 1st, but there's still always a low potential outside of that season as well. Something with nesting birds is they're pretty much going to be everywhere. There's probably going to be a nest on the project site at some point. So the goal is really to just try and identify those early and try to prevent them from setting up their nests within somewhere that could cause delays. So especially in the equipment, they love, like you can see in that bottom photo, finding somewhere that's kind of out of the wind and rain, and they think it's a great spot. They don't understand that equipment's going to move at some point. So as I've said before, kind of just try and maneuver things around, move them every few days. Doesn't take birds all that long to build the nest. Sometimes they can do it with even a single day, depending on the species. So just kind of continually maneuvering that, because once it's established nest, if that piece of equipment gets out of commission for the length of that nest, that could be a couple weeks, and that is problem for construction. So just keeping an eye out for nesting birds in general, if they're in vegetation, if they're on the site. If it's out of the way somewhere, they're probably not going to be too big a deal, but just keeping an eye out for those specifically within the work area and equipment. And if you go to the next slide, yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be even just the nest, right? Like a lot of times you might actually just see the nest, but somewhere small, some nest on the ground, some nest in cavities. And so you're not necessarily going to see a nest or eggs. So other behaviors that are indicative, like that red tit there, that's got a piece of grass in its bill. Like if you just see a bird going back and forth into the same spot with grass or twigs, that means they're building a nest. There's no real other reason they'd be doing that. If you see a bird carrying, big insects, or, like that red-tailed hawk there's got a mouse, if you see them carrying food back and forth to an area, it's like probably feeding nestlings. Other male territorial behavior, that can be indicative that there's a nest nearby. And so even if you can't locate the specific nest, you may still see some of this other behavior and be like, hey, I can't really see into this cavity in the equipment, but I think a bird's building a nest. Give us a call. We can come out and sort of assess what's the status and what's going on there, and try and move forward as best as possible. So keep an eye out for that, because it's probably going to come up at some point on the project site. The goal is just making sure it's out of a location that's hopefully going to avoid any delays to construction. San Joaquin kit fox definitely has the potential to be around. They're kind of throughout most of the Central Valley. And so even in the areas where there's a lot of solar farms, agriculture, stuff like that, they kind of like those areas. I've worked at multiple solar farms where they actually will just build their dens right under the panels, kind of shady, protection from other species. They'll get eaten by coyotes as well. And so the fact that they're fenced off, they're kind of secure. They actually really like facilities for that reason. If there's enough suitable habitat for them nearby, they're also very curious. So, if there's a project area, they may be coming in just to see what's going on, especially if there's food. So trash is a real important concern with these guys. Just any food scraps, things like that are lying around, making sure trash gets, sealed up into a closed container, removed from site. Because it's like they're little dogs. Basically, they're going to smell something, they're going to come in, and if they find trash once, they're going to just keep coming back and back, looking for, another meal. And then all of a sudden, is a problem. They're federally endangered, state threatened, and so definitely protected. I know you're all used to seeing coyotes and things like that, so they can look like small coyotes. Just, don't assume if it's like, that's a weird little coyote, or I think that was a big cat or whatever it is. They're kind of an in-between cat, dog looking thing. So if you do see something like that, definitely worth stopping and letting us know. The potential for burrowing owl. They're an owl that lives on and in the ground and in a hole. So, you're not going to usually see them up in a tree. You're going to see them just sitting on the ground. If there's a big den that's maybe got a, good size opening, yay big or bigger, they can definitely build their nests in there. So if you're seeing holes with bird droppings and pellets and stuff around the outside, that's another good indicator they're there. They're typically a little more active during daytime hours than you would expect for other owls. So if you were walking around site, then it would probably come out of the burrow and fly away. And so, that's another really good indication that that's there. So keep an eye out for any large holes. That's indicative, as well as any pipes or other equipment like that you may be staging, because that looks like a burrow to them, and they will absolutely fly in there and set up shop. So, making sure that any pipes, any staged materials got that end caps sealed up with some plastic or something, because they will come in there and like I said, they move around throughout the year. So if they might not be there on Monday, but you come back Wednesday and overnight some flew in and found that spot and thought it was great. So again, just kind of really trying to make sure that we're not giving them suitable habitat and creating structures for them to come, because they will find them, and then that becomes a bigger problem. Yeah, move on. Yeah, and as I mentioned, there's federal, state laws that are regarding these. So there can be jail time, there can be fines, can be levied against a project or the individual. So don't just sort of assume that it's worth the cost to rip that nest out and it's going to keep project moving, because you may end up with personal liability for those sort of actions. And that's kind of what we're here to do. So if you have see anything on site, don't try and deal with it. Just there's some real potential issues, fines and legal troubles from that. So yeah, just kind of, if you see something, just back off. Better to give us a call. Yeah, speeding through the work area, especially with the potential for kit fox. Think of like a dog. They're going to want to run into the street. I've seen it so many times on project sites that people are driving and they'll just zip right in between two cars, and it's super stressful when you're the bio on site that day when that happens. So just make sure keeping speed limits, avoiding any burrows, or if there's other areas that haven't really been developed previously and are, intact, making sure that area has been surveyed in advance, because there could be a den and you might not know that there's an animal underground, and driving over and accidentally, crush that den. Leaking vehicles and equipment and all that, that's pretty standard. Just making sure that there's no leaks, proper spill kits are on site. I don't think any waterways to be potentially impacted, but during rainy season, any kind of spoils piles and stuff, getting a straw wattle or something around that's always best management. So yeah. And again, just trash, making sure that's all sealed up, taken away. Don't want to lure anything in. Animals will smell that. They'll come from a long ways to try and get in at that. If they don't get any reward, they'll leave. If they find something, they'll keep coming back. Excavations, making sure if there's any pits that they're covered, so stuff doesn't just fall in and get trapped in there. If it's like a trench or something, leaving a escape ramp on one side, or putting a 2x4, something like that. So if something were to fall in, it would have a escape route. Pipes, keeping those ends covered, keeping it from becoming a den or a burrow for something. And then just avoiding any use of poisons, because even if there's rodents and stuff like that, that could be problematic. That poison may end up accidentally killing something sensitive, and that's no good. So yeah, just kind kind of more general stuff here. Don't be picking up animals if it's something that's in the work area and you're not sure, what's going on. Again, just take a photo, send it our way. If it's, we can probably look at that real quick and be like, oh, that's, all good. If it is something special status, could be real problematic. So don't just assume, better to just take a beat, and kind of run things our way by that. And yeah, just reach out at any point if there's something you're not certain about, and we can, find the best course of action. Typical things for bio that, we're really concerned about, if there's going to be like removing trees or vegetation, potential for nests, other things occupied in there. Again, I don't think there's any waterways on this, but that, is often pretty sensitive. The excavations, making sure nothing gets trapped or gets trenched through if there is a burrow, because a lot of these animals, it gets hot out there, they spend time underground during the day, so making sure the area is kind of clear of any potential for that. And then the staging equipment and trash and debris, as I've mentioned.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. In the Malaga power block area, we recently had a gray fox show up, and he probably smelled some food. Says, "Hey guys, what's going on?" Next thing you know, don't feed them. That's the worst thing you can do, because when one shows up, then several show up. So that's why housekeeping is extremely important when it comes to biological resources and making sure they don't come onto the project, because once they do, that slows down construction. That creates new requirements, new monitoring, new costs, etc. So the best thing we can do is, have good housekeeping, reduce trash, do all those good best management practices that Ryan discussed on site, to keep the critters out of there and make sure we can get our work done. So, to wrap up, we discussed paleo, archaeological, and biological resources, some of the things to look for, some of the things to avoid, and then contacts to be made. In some instances, there will be monitors on site. If you do find those resources, bring it up to the monitor on site. If there's not a monitor on site, you can call me direct. I'm the environmental compliance manager, or Josh is the project manager. So either he or someone will be on site. So if we don't have any monitors present, then go ahead and notify them. For the Hanford Malaga, Alyssa Newcomb is going to be the cultural resources specialist. I work directly with her. So again, reach out to me if you find anything, and then she will be the contact for those resources. Jennifer DiCenzo, who just presented paleontological resources, will be in charge of those. And then Ryan Wardle is going to be leading the Malaga BEST project, tap and switch. And then Morgan Craig is going to be reading the Hanford. Again, reach out to me direct, and I will get it to the appropriate biologist on site. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. I just wanted to, thank everybody for attending. This WEAP is required to work on the project in addition to the safety WEAP. We're not here to get you in trouble. We're not here to trick you. We're not here to tell on you. We're not here to tell on you to the agencies or get you fined or anything like that. We're here to build a project on budget and on time and work directly with you. So, we want you guys to trust us, to make sure we're doing the things right, to make sure you guys can do your work unimpeded at least as much as possible. So again, if you see something you're not sure about it, bring it up. Let's check it out. It may be nothing, it may be something, but if we don't do the due diligence on these resources, that's when agencies can start getting involved. And then if you create a distrust with the agency, that creates problems for completing the project, and it slows things down significantly. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I'm going to stop sharing the screen right now, and want to thank everybody. But is there any questions out there about what we've discussed? Anything further that you wanted clarification on? All right, I'm going to take that as a no. I want to thank everybody again. This WEAP will be sent out for those folks not here for attendance. Stickers will be handed out, I believe, for hard hats, and that'll be a requirement to work on these projects. So I'm going to hang up here in a second, and hopefully the recording will stop. I'm not sure. I see Andrew took off, but hopefully he'll take care of the recording. I think he's going to send it out to everybody. Again, we'll be on there. Our contacts, names and numbers and emails, etc., will be on there as well. So If you think of something down the line or you got any questions related to environmental compliance or requirements, feel free to give me a call, give me an email anytime. I'm on call all the time. So I know how construction goes and you need immediate answers and I'm here to answer those immediately. So again, thank everybody. Thanks to everybody and have a good weekend.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank
Thanks,
you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.